Good afternoon, everybody. I am Bruce Nix, Director of Business Agility for Vaco and Principal Agile Coach in our Agile practice. And again, thank you to City Current for hosting our little conversations. Today, I'm very pleased to have Bill Piper with VC3 with us today. Bill and I have engaged in several different conversations over different topics over the past months. And today is actually one that we thought was pretty relevant and important to kind of just put out there to see what kind of conversations it sparks. And it's around psychological safety. And we'll dig into that a little bit. But I wanted to introduce Bill as well. Bill, welcome. Thank you for coming today, for giving up some of your time to sit here and babble with me. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bruce. Glad to be here.
All right. So, Bill, you and I have, like I said, we have had several conversations, but we landed on psychological safety as we felt that was important during this time of crisis, as we emerge through crisis, beyond crisis. What does psychological safety mean? Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so elusive and it's so abstract. And I think probably the most important things to be aware of or to consider when you're thinking about psychological safety, and you and I talked about this at length, is self-awareness. And on one hand, psychological safety, I think from like its most foundational standpoint would mean just feeling okay. And somebody having the space and the presence, and they don't fear judgment, they don't fear being hurt or wounded by others around them in their community. But I think what precedes psychological safety is people having an understanding of how they make other people feel. And so it's very much two sides of the same coin there.
Sure, yeah. And we talked about this too. Feel like there's probably a misunderstanding, and I like the way that you kind of summarize what psychological safety is, because I think too many times the misinterpretation of that term means we're in a nice protected room and I have to feel good all the time. I have to feel, I have to have that warm and fuzzy. But hearing the way that you phrased it, that's not the case. Right? It's not that I'm here. I have to make sure that your feelings are always met and that I'm not hurting your feelings. Now, there is a certain approach to how I should talk to you, but psychological safety is creating an environment where it's okay to be authentic and bring your authentic self, and it's okay to be transparent and have some healthy conflict around certain conversations and dialogues. Would that be, good?
Yeah, and I'll quote this. I'll quote somebody that's really smart. His name's Bruce Nix. But I mean, you talk about
super dude. He's a super killer dude. I follow him. I follow him on all his social channels.
Yes, everything he puts out. But you did a talk last month talking about. I forget the main point, but one of your subpoints was how high trust environments can breed very healthy disagreements. And right. It's psychological safety is probably one of those things that it's hard to clearly identify and it's hard to clearly articulate because it's so abstract. But you can almost identify it by what is present, absent of the thing itself. So if you have very healthy disagreements, if you have people that share unpopular ideas without fear of being judged, if you have really healthy dialogue around things from an analytical standpoint, around like, okay, let's look at this from a data standpoint, and if this were true, what the implications of that would be, versus a judgment standpoint, like, no, that's qualitatively a bad idea. Rather, let us employ some quantitative thinking and do some testing around if that would make sense. So I would totally agree with your statement there.
Yeah, I think that's good. Obviously, I support where you got those ideas.
My source,
Bruce, yeah. totally respectful source. But I think that's, you brought up the, when you look at organizations, and if you just wander through the halls, and like, is there silence when you go through there? Like when teams are working together, is there just pure silence, and not everybody's heads down trying to get something done silence, but just, no, I'm not gonna talk. I'm not gonna raise my voice. I'm not bringing up any questions. There could be that overarching fear that you spoke of. It's like, I'm not comfortable bringing up problems and tough issues, and what immediately comes to my mind is honestly, one area that I see that exhibits the lack of psychological safety is when I'm working with organizations and they have all of these projects and they have all these active projects and they're all green, and everyone knows they're watermelon projects. They're green on the outside, but they're red on the inside. It's just, there's this fear of bringing to the surface of actually going to your leadership and saying, no, this project is red, because no one wants to face and no one wants to be in that seat, because they fear that there's now a perception of they failed, right? Rather than bringing up the issues so that we can either get the project back on track or, address some underlying issue. Maybe it's it's some bottleneck in the, entire system, right? If you take a systems view approach of it. So that's it. I think that was very good. Yeah. So what role do you think leaders play in creating that psychological safety environment that we're talking of, sort of creating that ecosystem of safety?
Yeah. Well, it stems from leaders, and I have been the beneficiary of people that have promoted tremendous psychological safety. I've been in environments that haven't. I know for a fact that I have promoted a lack of psychological safety in certain times of my career among people I've worked with, and hope that others would say that I've likewise promoted psychological safety. But I think among the biggest challenges, especially in times like right now, where if you've got a business owner or an executive that there's so much uncertainty in the marketplace, there's so much uncertainty in the general climate right now, and none of us has any degree of confidence that we were used to of being able to meet our own needs, of being able to predict what next month is going to look like. We were just talking about how we just don't know what this spike in COVID is going to mean. Does it have real implications? Is it an increase in testings, or is it really more increase in cases? We just don't know. So as leaders, having a keen understanding of what's going on in yourself internally, and having a keen understanding of where you are most likely going to be tempted to pursue getting your own needs met or operate out of fear, rather than identifying, okay, Peter Drucker, what's best for the organization? Asking that
Right.
question first and foremost.
Yeah.
Simon Sinek, in his book, Leaders Eat Last, I think he spoke about, I think it was Nelson Mandela. He talks about how one of his main techniques as a leader was just speaking last and letting everybody else articulate their own ideas first, so that they could operate from an understanding of where their people were, rather than operating from, let me set the tone and let everybody else react off of me, versus understanding my flock, so to speak, and cast a vision for where we need to go.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I guess it kind of sparked, going back to the presentation that you mentioned that I gave at the IT Council. It's a little bit of that management X versus management Y theory, right? Management X is all people are bad, and I'm going to tell you exactly what to do, and my opinion is the only one that matters, as opposed to the management Y approach, which I think is going to be needed more as emerging through, because you talked about, some of those basic safety needs, right? And you and I have talked about this, sort of that whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs. During COVID, a lot of people were on top, right, of the self-actualization pyramid, and they got knocked down. And so now we're back at this. We have to create a base foundation of safety for these people in order for them to feel comfortable to begin climbing back up that pyramid. And leaders absolutely play a critical role in that. And I love how you said that. It's, having to be more inclusive and understanding that you don't have to have all the answers. You can certainly provide clarity of where we want to go, but show humility and knowing that you don't have all the answers. You're willing to listen to the other voices around you. Yeah. I think that's fantastic. So what do you think would be what do you think are some things that people are going to have to be aware of as they begin to come back into, that we're moving away a little bit from the virtual environment, moving back into physical spaces, but we're probably going to be in some hybrid work environment for some time now. What are some things that you think are important to create psychological safety as people begin to try to normalize what could be, the current future workforce for some time now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really tough. I mean, on one hand, you could be overly normal, and you've got a lot of people that, you probably have a very healthy representation of people in the middle of that bell curve that would be like, great, we can operate as normal, but you'd have people on the outside that would possibly be uncomfortable, or they're going to be feel like they're in a minority. But I think a couple things, obviously a lot of people are giving the options of working from home, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think it's possible to overstate the value of one-on-ones and genuine coaching right now. There's a difference between training and coaching, and training in the sense of let me tell you what to do, and coaching of let me help you understand for yourself how to apply what's already within you. And so leadership sitting down with their staff, asking questions, and really having heart level conversations to where people aren't afraid of being, they can have a safe ground to where they aren't afraid of repercussions of anything they would say. An exploratory environment of like, hey, we've got to do this. This is where we've got to go, and here's the tools we've got to get there. How do we do this? Rather than, everybody else seems to be doing this fine. Why don't you just jump on board? I think that would be a very easy default disposition for a lot of people. And I also think another very real danger for any of us is making ourselves the template. And for any area, but especially here, of well, this is how I did it, or this is the burden, these are the responsibilities, these are the concerns and cares that I have to carry. So let me project those on you. And you know what? I don't perceive mine to be as bad or as heavy as yours, or vice versa, rather. I don't perceive yours to be as bad or heavy as mine. So you should feel like you have it pretty easy.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think from my perspective, because we are still going to be working in this sort of hybrid virtual environment. I think it's going to be really important for leaders, for everyone, really, to kind of just demonstrate that engagement, because it's too easy. We can still say this is face to face, but is it really? And being able to demonstrate that engagement, and this is actually a principal coach in our practice, Bob Galen, actually told me this during one of our sessions, is that it's even in these video interactions, it's lean forward, right? When you're talking with someone, to show that you're actively engaged in what they're saying, right? Make sure your camera isn't so much so that you're getting just your forehead, right? But lean forward to show that engagement. And you still have to be aware of your body language. I think when the camera's on, people get a little casual with it, but you can still see if I'm sitting here with my shoulders up tight and looking at you, and I have a furrowed brow, something's probably wrong, right? And that's also why we ask during our coaching sessions to have your video on, because I can't see any of that if it's off, right? And if you certainly wouldn't go into a one-on-one with someone and close the door with the other person on the other side of the door. And that's what this is if you turn off your camera.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's good. So we are coming to the end of our time. I feel like we could continue these conversations. This always happens with us. We always go beyond our time, but it is always such a pleasure to talk with you, Bill. I think you have some great ideas. But so what would be some recommendations from you for people to kind of go learn more about psychological safety and how they could perhaps either observe how that currently is, maybe even measure it in their current environment, or just learn more about psychological safety in general?
Yeah, well, obviously we've talked about a couple of them. There are a couple really great books that hit, even if not like dead center of the target on this, they're like all around it on the bullseye here. But one is Focus by Daniel Goleman. And like a big part of the book talks about self-awareness and talks about seeing others as others see you, so that we can operate. If we aren't aware how we behave, our ability to be as effective as we can be is immediately extremely mitigated. And our ability to understand ourselves outside of ourselves is fundamental and foundational to being able to help other people get where they need to go. And that's the essence of leadership, helping other people get where they need to go. So, and then another book that I mentioned is Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last. Fantastic book. And then I think there's a tremendous amount of value in people just learning how to think. And there's also, there are a number of services out there. I know you've worked in that area of having adaptability and awareness and processes and models for how you can adapt incrementally over time to meet certain challenges. So those are a couple of my thoughts.
Yeah, no, and probably just a couple to add on. One would be from me would be The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson, who that's really where I kind of learned about psychological safety and some of the work she did with Google, and which is a good segue into their rework, where they use and they measure some pretty simple measurements too around how to gauge psychological safety within their teams. And so those would be a few for me. But definitely, and if anyone out there has any other recommendations around psychological safety, let us know. Would love to hear more. And if you have any questions for even Bill or I around psychological safety, would love to engage in conversations around that. Well, Bill, that is all of our time today. Again, definitely appreciate you. Appreciate Jeremy Park and City Current for hosting us again today. But any last closing thoughts, Bill?
No, I've enjoyed the time, and it'll be interesting to see what happens over these next months. I think the other side of the coin here, all of this is hope. We all have a tremendous amount of hope in the midst of this uncertainty. But I appreciate the dialogue, and as I echo everything, I always enjoy talking with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it, and hopefully we can we'll get another topic and do this soon.
Sounds great.
All right, thanks.